There's life in the Champions Cup, yeah. For a tournament that is often criticised for the format, for mismatches, for travel logistics, every so often it delivers a reminder of the magic of European club rugby. On Sunday, we saw Leinster hold off La Rochelle in the Stade Marcel de Flandre in an absolute epic. And 24 hours earlier, while it wasn't quite the heights of Leinster-La Rochelle, Munster did enough to beat Saracens and breathe life potentially back into their season. Unfortunately, Ulster collapsed in the second half at Welford Road against Leicester, while for Connacht, they very much have ambitions of winning the Challenge Cup and they can book top seeding throughout the knockout stages in the Challenge Cup if they can do the job against Cardiff this weekend. So that's plenty for us to talk about on today's episode of the Left Wing Podcast. I'm Will Slattery and I'm delighted to be joined by Luke Fitzgerald and Jonathan Bradley of the BBC for our chat today. And Luke, we'll start with that game on the southwest coast of France, Leinster-La Rochelle. Leinster 16-14 winners. It was an absolute epic, I thought, from start to finish. Maybe a couple of handling errors and some sloppiness, but, you know, such a compelling and thrilling game. You know, Leinster won it, they lost it again, they won it again, they lost it again, and eventually won it just about at the death. You know, for me, the story of the game was their defence. You know, they started in the first quarter with a number of defensive sets on their own line to hold out La Rochelle and keep the scoreline low. Then they struck for their try. And then into minute 82, I think, when the game was won, they were still defending for their lives, holding out La Rochelle again. You know, to go that length of time with that defensive intensity, you know, we discussed after the Munster game this kind of style they've been honing, and they really stress tested it against La Rochelle. Like, what did you make of that defensive piece?
I was unbelievably impressive, I thought. There's aspects of it that, like, I'm still finding difficult to come to terms with. I think, like, just the sheer amount of missed tackles, but I know that's part of this, of the thinking on it, in terms of pressuring and pushing people back into places that you want to be making, collisions happen, and you know, how you kind of protect that gain line, you know. So they might look like they make a break, but they don't really actually get over the gain line. So I'm still getting coming to terms with that. I think a team that is a bit more accurate, and I think later in the year when the weather is a little bit better, I think you could probably get a little bit exposed. I'm thinking of a Toulouse, and I think even a La Rochelle with I thought Hastoy had a pretty average game. He did some good stuff, Will, but I thought he was pretty poor.
Certainly the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, but he was sloppy throughout, Will. Like, he had a lot of kicking errors. I thought he was generally pretty sloppy. I thought even the conversion for the try, like, to not make the post, like to not even make the crossbar, I thought was, I don't know. I'd be disappointed, even as a fairly poor kicker myself, to not at least make it to the post, you know, to have a chance of scoring. Like, distance should never be an issue on a conversion. Yeah, look. What I would say is that's a really difficult place to go and play. I think they might have been a different proposition, possibly with Skelton. I think we know the impact he has around the pitch. He causes chaos everywhere, and I think they might have got momentum in a few areas where Leinster were maybe able to stop them. But look, I think that's a great win, and I think they did force a lot of errors out of guys like Hastoy as well. It wasn't all just him making errors with lots of time in hand, like, you know. So there's a combination of Leinster doing well and La Rochelle maybe not being up to scratch. I thought there was some kind of Herculean type efforts. I thought, like, Doris was unbelievable throughout that game. Like, he was unbelievable. Like some of the turnovers and things he got, like things he has no right. You're like, God, I don't think you should be competing for that. There's such low percentage of you getting the ball there or giving away a penalty. He was unbelievable. I thought he was so good. It was good to see. I thought Baird had a good game as well, which was very positive. So yeah, look, very, very good in lots of areas. Some of the concerns around their performance maybe are still there. Like, I don't know if we know anything new about Leinster. Maybe is one thing I would say. We're still looking for that kind of complete attacking performance. I thought they were a bit sloppy there, handling wise. And I don't know if that's because they're so tired when they get the ball back. Combined with maybe not unbelievable conditions at the moment, but they haven't found that flow, I think, in attack, Will. I mean, they were very clinical for the try, and that was excellent, but I think that's still an area where I think against the big teams, you've got to be better. You've got to be more clinical. You've got to put more pressure on for longer periods with the ball. You've got to be able to do that. I think the line out is still a bit of a concern for me. I think they were still a little bit sloppy there at times. I think I'd love to see them win a few more, although La Rochelle are very good in the line out, but Toulouse are very good there too. They're the ones I kind of have in the back of my mind, Will, when I'm saying all these things. I'm sure, Jonathan, Jonathan yourself are probably the same when you're assessing Leinster. And I think the discipline is the other issue. So the three big things we've been talking about Leinster all year, we're saying, oh God, I'd like to see a little bit more improvement if they're to go on and deliver on bringing a cup home. That's the other thing. I think they're a little bit. They're competing so hard that sometimes they don't know when to take their foot off the gas competing, and they're giving away a few more penalties than I think they probably should, and maybe piling on a bit of pressure on themselves. So they're my caveats, with the real point that, the overarching point is that it was a brilliant away win. That's a really difficult place to go and play. And La Rochelle haven't been good this year, but they were always going to be able to get up for a Leinster game at home. And I thought they did that. It was a very physical game.
Yeah, you knew from the first few minutes they were definitely up for it, and any kind of domestic, patchiness in their form was not going to apply on Sunday afternoon. Like some of the guys who haven't been great for them, like Jack Noel, someone who's big money signing, I thought he was brilliant. Like, he was very elusive. I thought he made a lot of stuff happen for them. I thought Paul Boudant on the flank was really, really good. A guy who has played for France but doesn't maybe have the name recognition of some other of their international back rows. I thought he had a really physical performance, and they did put Leinster under a lot of pressure at times. Jonathan, I guess the newness that I saw, we talked about this off air, is that like Leinster kind of imposing that defensive aggression on a team like La Rochelle and like marching them back, especially in that opening period. Like La Rochelle had a couple of, I think, two scrums or a scrum on a line out, kind of on the 5 metre line, and they ended up when the ball was turned over, kind of 15 metres out, 20 metres out. Like, that certainly impressed me. And obviously we saw Leinster shut down Munster very comprehensively, in Thomond Park. This was another step up, or a few steps up, and I thought they did a very good job in kind of holding firm, bar that lovely finish by Dylan Lades.
Yeah, I think it was massively impressive. Like, we talked a little bit last week about how La Rochelle, aren't the same team that they were whenever they were winning this competition back to back. But it's, as Luke said, it's still a very, very tough place to go. And the way that La Rochelle started that game, the way that Leinster were able to answer that with that massively long defensive stand, not even the individual instances in the defensive stand, but just the sheer length of it. And as you see, they were able to drive La Rochelle back. I think it was basically for the first 20 minutes of that game, La Rochelle were up and around over 70% in possession, up and around over 70% in territory. And the way that Leinster just aggressively drove them back and didn't really give them any sort of opening is really, to my mind, the best example that we've had of this different Leinster team, this Jacques Nienaber Leinster team, as compared to a Stuart Lancaster team. Now, there's, as Luke alluded to there's still a lot of stuff that they, I think, need to work on. Their lack of tries is probably going to be, we'll see how things play out this weekend, but the lack of tries that they scored is probably going to be what sends them on the road in a semi-final, say, in this competition. It means that they will have to go and win in France. They haven't had to go to France they haven't had to go away in a semi-final in this competition since they were beaten by La Rochelle 2021. So there could be a big challenge ahead, caused by the fact that they haven't added the extra layers to the game. I think it's been alluded to by a couple of players that, the extra focus on defense maybe has taken away some of their attention to their attack, which isn't as good as it was 2 years ago, isn't as sharp as it was 2 years ago. But again, like we were talking about this off air, it's fascinating how they've become such a different proposition over the course of the last 12 months. Like, similar players, obviously they have the three big name signings, but similar enough players. The players that we saw really excelling at the weekend are the same players that were there under Stuart Lancaster, but they've just become a completely different type of team, a completely different proposition. I think it was O'Gara actually said, they're more difficult to play against. Are they better? We have to wait and see. That's almost a curse for Leinster, that, we judge them on how they do in May and June, and then it's another 10, 11 months before they can really pass that test again come the end of the season. But for what was the biggest test that they've had so far, and for what, as much as we caveated things last week with La Rochelle's being slightly less than what they were, that was the biggest test that Leinster have had, and they came away with what, to my mind, was a very impressive victory.
Yeah, just to read that Ronan O'Gara quote, because I think it's interesting and it touches on what we were speaking about in the build-up, about the differences between the Lancaster era now and ultimately which one is more equipped to go on and win a Champions Cup. He said, I think they're definitely harder to play against, but are they better? We will see in May. You look at the final in Dublin in 2023, and not many test teams can do what they did in the first 11 minutes. We didn't do much wrong, and we were 17-0 down. And that was kind of like the apex of the Lancaster era, that kind of blitzkrieg attack, 3 tries in the opening quarter. They obviously didn't end up winning the game. The argument has been made by Luke that, maybe they punched themselves out. This is a different style, much more reliant on not having the ball and forcing errors that way. And Luke, you mentioned Caelan Doris, a guy who, it's funny, we often have a guy who comments under our YouTube videos after a big Ireland or Leinster game and says, oh, another game where Doris has been outplayed by like a star number 8. There's some narrative where like Ardie Sevilla and Aldred in some of these Leinster matches, Ruma in the Champions Cup final last year maybe has gotten the better of him, but not so at the weekend. Even though Aldred did have a pretty good game and had a key intervention from that line out near the line, I agree with you completely. Doris was absolutely amazing, and he's someone who's really, I wouldn't necessarily transformed his game, but he's really buying into kind of obviously the physicality, but he's kind of like on the edge now. He's really on the edge. He wasn't really that kind of player, I didn't think, maybe 2 years ago. Now he's kind of every ruck. I remember in Thomond Park in particular, over Christmas, I thought he was like around the line. He probably piled in the side like 2 or 3 rucks in a row. He's really trying to get that edge and kind of that kind of dark arts kind of style that has really been added to his game, I think.
Yeah, he looks highly illegal a lot.
Yeah, I was trying to be diplomatic. Yeah, I was trying to be a bit more diplomatic.
I think he looks like, but like, sorry, you would say that about like the likes of McCaw as well. Like, you say that a lot about it. When you're watching South Africa and France at times, you're kind of going like, Jesus, like just because they won that collision, it looks to me like it looks illegal to me. But like he didn't get that badly pinged, and he seems to be able to have a nibble completely illegally and then come back and delay the play for the opposition without the referee kind of pinging him because it's not that bad, because he puts his hands up and says, "Oh, sorry, I know I'm wrong. I thought I might have been wrong." That kind of that one where someone steps through and because I would just penalize that stuff all day. I think that really kills the game. It kind of falls into that people dragging in the scrum half from rucks and things who are part of it. I think it's really, really illegal, and it's really cynical. But I have to say he is brilliant at it, and he hasn't been getting pinged off the park. I think some refs would probably. I think I could see him having a bad day out though with it, because he just competes so hard at everything. That if he doesn't get a few of those kind of big steals that he got in the weekend, you're kind of going, is that actually worth the 2 or 3 penalties? I don't know. And like you'd feel like he might be on the edge, because like even as you say, close to the line, there was a few I was thinking, oh God, like Leinster. I thought Leinster got away with 1 or 2 where I thought they're right on the edge of a yellow card here. And La Rochelle had the pressure close to Leinster's line, etc. And I just kind of thought, this doesn't feel comfortable. It feels like if there's another penalty here, that it's definitely a yellow, but I wouldn't have been unbelievably, like I wouldn't have said, oh, that was very harsh if he'd given a yellow the penalty before, if you know what I mean. So that's why I kind of mentioned the discipline, Will. It's an area where I'm kind of watching with them a little bit. I think they're competing brilliantly. They're and they've got such a strong bench. They can compete for so long throughout the game. Like I don't think the level falls off as much as it does kind of with some other clubs.
Just to come in on the discipline, look, you made a good point a minute ago about their aggression, and it's getting them a lot of change. But like, there was a couple of offsides that were just like, a good bit like Keane Healy early on, Furlong on front of the post, even like Andrew Porter, that last penalty for Hastoy, like La Rochelle on the halfway line. Leinster's defence has been great all day. Porter like tries to steal the ball, ends up going off his feet. Like some people are arguing he might have stolen it before he went off his feet, but look, I think that's just an unnecessarily aggressive risk with a minute left in the clock. You have La Rochelle where you want them, and I don't think he needs to go for that ball. And I agree with that like there's an aggression across the board at the breakdown. They are getting change, but I just thought, especially the Porter one, I was thinking they don't need to go for that. Like just let La Rochelle have the ball.
Yeah, you're where you want to be. It's that's kind of what I was saying to Will about earlier on. Like it's that, I haven't been unbelievably comfortable with the defense. The defense is like 100%. Competing all the time, off the line all the time. And I've always kind of thought that like I agree with it in principle, but I don't agree with going 100%. I'm thinking nearly 85 or 90%. You know, where you still allow people that little bit of wiggle room to say, do you know what? I kind of like us here on the halfway line. You know, if they have this ruck, they've still got to pass it back kind of 5 meters. If we're off the line pretty good there, they might be 52, 53 meters and so on, so on. And they've been able to do that. They did that to La Rochelle lots of times through the game. So, I don't know if you can take your foot off the pedal using this system, Will. That's the one concern. And I don't think Leinster have been able to demonstrate that yet. And I wonder against a big team that doesn't get as physically punished or is a little bit more accurate when the ball isn't slippy at the end of the season in a big game. I just wonder, do they get a little bit punished using this system? Now, the offset on that is I think Leinster's attack will improve. So maybe they'll get a few more of those tries that Jonathan was mentioned that they've kind of really lacked thus far. You know, they might be a bit more clinical when the conditions are better for themselves and they've more time to gel. But that's the big concern with Leinster at the moment, I think, for me. But like I will say, like they can only play what's in front of them. They've been really, really successful using this so far. I will say that it's generally easier to deliver on a defensive performance than an attacking performance in a final or in a semi-final. That's one thing I'd say. Like, it doesn't require as much thinking or guile as, you know, a really good attacking performance where you've got loads of things have got to go right. You got to, you know, you even think of the La Rochelle try. Like, that was an unbelievable bit of play. Like, the crossfield kick was on, like, that's so hard to execute. It's like a 35-meter kick perfectly cross field. Then it's, you know, Lade has to collect it. It's an unbelievable grubber kick to collect it and stay calm to pick it up over the line and dot it down. Like, there's so many good skills that you have to deliver there. Whereas Leinster had, you know, defensively, they were brilliant all game, but they didn't have to, like, you just have to deliver mentality-wise and be unbelievably committed to the system. So there are pros and cons to this, Will, that I can see. And I'd love to be sitting where Leinster are sitting now, because I think some of the concerns we have are pretty fixable. And I would say, I would hope that they feel that even if they're 100% committed to the defensive system, that they can still have the conversation with the lads and go, listen, that's one that you got to use your head and just pull back from there. We're trying to compete at every single thing for the whole game. But that's one where you got to say, you're a better player than that. Like, Porter is, you know, loads of international caps, you know, an intelligent guy, brilliant athlete. That to me, I agree with you, Will. I think that they're the ones who are going to say, come on, like, just, that's not the one, you know, that kind of way. Let's be sensible here.
It reminded me of Paddy Wallace back in the day in Cardiff, like, you know, just halfway line, just
and Bestie,
a minute to go, and just look, you don't need to be going for that. Just let the opposition play themselves out of it.
But poor lads, they're such good lads, the two of them. They didn't sleep that night. Paddy couldn't even enjoy the night out, I don't think. He was so shook by that. Seriously.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Jonathan,
sorry, Jonathan. Keep going.
I think even in a wider sense, like, not so much in the game-specific moments of the Porter one, you know, when a penalty concession could lose the game. I think maybe a concern that I would have is the access that those penalties give, because you're giving away penalties on the halfway line, and then all of a sudden you're in your own 22 defending again. And that sort of goal line stand, red zone stands that we've seen from them, they've been so good at. But the concern is that they will give a team too much access. Like we saw in the Munster game, they give Munster a lot of access to ill discipline, and Munster couldn't quite take advantage of it. But the concern that I would have is that maybe it is only against the Toulouse, because Bordeaux, as much as Bordeaux have this incredible backline, they don't have quite the same amount of power up front as Toulouse would do, I don't think. But Toulouse are the danger, I think, in that regard of can they have that 80-minute performance that features these 2-3 really, really lengthy goal line defensive stand against a team as powerful as Toulouse. But the point that Luke makes is bang on. Like, it's a great position to be in when we're talking about this as a team that have conceded, it's 144 points in 12 games. So, you know, they're averaging 12 points conceded a game, which is absolutely incredible. So there will be people out there that probably think that we're nitpicking, but I just think it's the standards that we hold Leinster to really are, you know, can they win this competition?
And actually, just to cover that one, to come in on that one, sorry, just to come in on a point you're making there, because I think that's really important, because Bordeaux as well, like, absolute standout in the competition so far. Like, they're blowing teams away with the kind of danger they pose behind the scrum. Like, to my mind, they're the ones that kind of might kill you on if you miss a few too many of those tackles, they're the team that might do you there rather than through the kind of power game. I thought La Rochelle, when they got some of the kicking game right, that's the way you beat this system to me. I think Ulster did that very well actually last year. Do you remember? I think some lovely kind of kicks and things like that. They got a bit creative. Any thoughts on that? Like the worry would be you see someone like Billy Burry, or I'm sorry, I'm not sure I pronounce his name very good there, but someone like that. You know the way Ramos seems to use him brilliantly with France. That's my concern as well. If they were looking at that game and they have to play Leinster, they're kind of going, okay, right, let them come hard, but we're going to try and pick them apart with little chips and behind crossfield kicks. Anything on that from the weekend that you thought?
Yeah,
because
like
when I was thinking back when you made the point,
you mentioned the Ulster game. It was Billy Burns that day, and even like going further back with Nina Bar. Like if you remember the 2019 World Cup game between New Zealand and South Africa, like that was how New Zealand beat them that day. So I do think that is the blueprint, but exactly the same with that Dylan Leeds try. Like the execution required is so high that I wonder, is it just if somebody does beat you that way, I wonder, do you almost just have to put your hands up and say, there is obviously a gap in the armour. If you can exploit it, then fair play to you, but it's going to be very, very difficult to do, I suppose.
Yeah, we're gonna make you do something spectacular to beat us, and we'll live with that if you can deliver it in the semi-final, quarter-final. Yeah, no, I get that.
Yeah, like the late.
Yeah,
like the late finish was, unbelievable. You said, like, is in watching it first, I thought, could Frawley have put a little bit of contact on him after the grubber to slow him down slightly? Like, was there enough in that there that he could have kind of impeded him slightly, not taking him off the ball, obviously, but maybe disrupted his run a bit because Ringrose was covering across. But watching it again, Lades gets it down to his foot so quickly that I actually don't think he could have. I think it was just like...
It's a really difficult technique, Will, because when you're coming across like Frawley is there, you want to use the touchline, so your kind of body is relatively square, because really... normally what Lades will be trying to do there is get back in field, if you know what I mean. So you want to cover that. So you're kind of square on Lades' right shoulder, if you know what I mean. You're kind of nearly chest to that. And it's very, very difficult to go again with him there once you're kind of almost committed to a collision. So I think you're right. I think the skill execution is really good. Like what you kind of have to do is if you're Frawley, you kind of have to get that left arm in and try and run with him. And as you say, you don't want to take him out, but that's a fine balance too, because if you trip him up there, you're probably looking at a yellow and a penalty try. But look, I think the point is that there was some brilliant skill that was required to break Leinster down, and that's what it's going to take. Problem is, you think about some of those French teams who you'd be concerned about, possibly some of the South African ones. They have a few guys where you kind of say, ooh, like if that person goes through, you're in big trouble. Like if you think about Toulouse, for example, like, are you going to be worried about 9 and 10 there delivering under pressure? Not so much. You think about the back three in Bordeaux. Are you concerned about them delivering on what they're great at? No, they're just fucking super quick and they sniff out opportunities. And Leinster do give up opportunities, so that'd be a concern. To Jonathan's point, like, you worry about the pack with Toulouse and you worry about some of the South African packs with this pressure. So there's ways to get at Leinster. Like I think La Rochelle would be encouraged by that performance, even though they lost. And the reason I say that is because I think Skelton would make a big difference in that game. If you think about how tight it was. If they played them at home, now that won't be the case probably, but if they played them at home again, I'd say they'd think, I might be able to take them. There's ways into the game.
Just to come in on that, like, because they won't be playing them at home, and I thought Ronan O'Gara's comments afterwards, he was kind of slightly buoyed by the performance, which fair enough, they did play very well, but like, you can't underestimate how damaging a defeat that is to La Rochelle's Champions Cup chances. Like, a lot of people had the opinion after the game, oh, this shows that they're a proper contender, which they were. I'm not sure if they still are, despite from losing that game, just because it puts them on a very tricky knockout path. They obviously have been to Dublin and they've won a Champions Cup final, so could they do it again? Yes, but for me, if I was a La Rochelle person, I would be pleased with the performance to a degree, but they probably left it behind them at the end, and it also makes their path quite treacherous. So while it showed there's fight in the old team yet, I wouldn't be coming away from that necessarily jumping for joy from a La Rochelle perspective, just purely because the path we've seen over the last couple of years is, if you were away in the knockouts, it is extremely difficult to win the tournament or to get to the final. And the other thing I'd like to mention is just a lot of people are watching that game and pitting a hypothetical matchup against Toulouse and what it might look like. Like, Leinster played Toulouse in the Champions Cup final last year and they held them trialless. they did get broken a couple of times and scrambled well and snagged Toulouse in the corner and denied them 2 tries. So we have seen it before. So I think Leinster can absolutely shut down Toulouse. They've already done it. So now the flip side to that coin is that Leinster's attack did not fire in that final either. They didn't score a try themselves. There was a drop goal that was,
Well, Toulouse still did break them open at the end, Will. Like, do you know what I mean? There was...
Yeah, no, in extra time, the game went for an extra, 20 minutes. I'm just saying, 80 minutes, most games don't end in a draw. Leinster didn't concede a try to an attack that put almost 60 points on Bordeaux in a final 2 or 3 weeks later in France. So I feel like we've seen that movie already. And while Leinster didn't win the game, I think they can win playing this way. But I thought they could win playing the other way as well. So there's lots of different... debate points on that, and we'll see as the season goes on. A few more things to get to from the match. Andrew Porter brought on after 20 minutes once again for Cian Healy. It kind of didn't even get really commented upon just because the game had so many of the talking points, but interesting that they did go with that in a big game, and it seemed to go, I suppose, pretty well in the sense of Porter stayed on, he didn't get injured, he was there in the melting pot, albeit, as we touched on, almost gave away the penalty at the end. James Ryan, Josh van der Fleer thought they had 2 huge performances as well, 2 guys who seemed to be really buying into this system and delivering really good displays. I want to talk to both of you about the kind of the game management from, I guess, both teams in the last kind of 10-15 minutes. I thought, Jonathan, Leinster really left that game open to La Rochelle snatching it, which they almost did. You had Ross Byrne missing a very simple penalty, Jamie Osborne kicking that ball out on the full just before that gave the scrum that ultimately led to Leigh's try. Even Jonathan, I thought taking on that Barrett penalty was ill-advised.
Barrett penalty, yeah.
It was a 10-metre line on the left touch line, 74 minutes on the clock. You put that into the corner, albeit the Leinster line-out's not rock solid. You have to bank yourself winning that ball and bleeding a bit of time off the clock. I just don't think that ball is really going over more than 10% of the time. And then obviously the ball comes back off the post. Josh van der Fleer catches it, ends up getting turned over again. I just thought there was a litany of moments at the end that kind of, you're thinking, God, they really could have left that game behind them. I thought ultimately they were the deserved winners, but a lot of moments there that they kind of shot themselves in the foot leads me still to question their ability to see out games of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably the flip side of what we've seen in recent years in big games from Leinster, where, they haven't come out on the right side of these games with the finest margins, and then the narrative sort of overtakes the final 10, 15 minutes, I feel like. So this idea that it's this massive win for Leinster, which it is a big win, but you can't brush under the carpet all the things that happened that made it such an entertaining game if you were watching it from a neutral perspective, because there were so many swings in that final, really incredible endgame that meant Leinster could have lost the game. And I think on another day, as we've seen, they do lose that game. And maybe part of it is decision making, but the players are so experienced that it shouldn't really be decision making. Part of it could be the pressure of the longer Leinster don't win this competition, the bigger it becomes. We're talking now 7 years since they've last won it, so it has become, the pressure has to ramp up as it becomes so central to their season. And I don't think this game was ever going to be definitive for their Champions Cup, but if you look at the difference between winning and losing, there was a massive swing in terms of what we've said. Essentially, this competition is now set up. The pool stages decide which of the good teams get home advantage in the playoffs. What we're going to see of who does and doesn't go through next week, none of those teams are going to win the competition. Everybody who has a chance of winning the competition is already through. So that tells you about just how important it is to get home advantage, which in my mind then really emphasises the size of the win for Leinster in terms of plotting their path through the competition. So I wouldn't underestimate the impact of pressure. Luke can obviously speak to it better than I can, but I think that part of that is just scar tissue possibly from the previous big games that they've had in Europe. But you would certainly expect players of that level of experience, both at club level and test level, to be making better decisions in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, I don't.
Do you think that? Can I ask you? You said, Will, did you think that Leinster deserved to win that?
I did over the course of the game. Yeah, I did.
Why?
I thought Leinster had I thought Leinster looked, even though they had to defend very well, I didn't think La Rochelle were like that close to like breaching their line other than the Lades try. I thought Leinster had a couple of opportunities.
What about the first 20 minutes?
La Rochelle had a lot of territory, but I didn't think they were like. I thought Leinster were actually defending like comfortably on their own line, if you get me. Like it was really tough, tigerish tackling and having to smash the guys back. But I didn't think La Rochelle were like on the verge of about to crossing the try line at any stage in that, personally. Obviously the end game when there's a block drop goal, a ball hits the post, you're like, do they deserve to win that game? But I just thought that the opportunities over the course of the game, no, it was close. I'm not saying they were, head and shoulders above them.
I just was, because my sense was relief when it's funny. It's the first time I really felt like when I have that emotion after a game, it's more kind of like, it wasn't like there was a massive big comeback. I felt like it was in the balance all the way through. I just felt like it was really, really tight.
I guess it's just the moments I referred to there. Like if Hastoy's penalty had gone over, or if the drop goal had gone over, those 4 or 5 mistakes in the last 15 minutes, I would have felt, Leinster really left that behind them. Like they had the game in control. They were 10 points up. You have to remember they were 10 clear at around the 3/4 mark. And then like a couple of errors start to creep in, and all of a sudden Hastoy is kicking with 30 seconds left to win the game. I was kind of like, how did Leinster kind of relinquish the control? So
Yeah. Maybe it's just because they put themselves in that kind of position. I suppose I just felt at half time I was kind of going, I'm kind of relieved they're going in ahead here. I kind of felt like if you thought about the half as a whole, I would have, if I was La Rochelle, I would have thought, we should have got something there. They had a few good opportunities that Leinster sniffed out quite well. I agree with you. They never really looked like, there wasn't a real clear cut one where you said, oh God, they really left that one behind. Do you know that kind of way?
It was just consistent pressure.
They had the pressure, and I was kind of thinking like, I'd still rather be in the opposition's 22 than be it, and even if I'm comfortable defending, I always feel like I'd rather be in the other half, that kind of way. But yeah, no, it's interesting. I just, when you said it, I was thinking, actually, do you know what? I'm not sure I actually definitively agree with that, even though I would have been really disappointed for them if they didn't win it. If you know what I mean, haven't put themselves in that position.
It was very close, and I was saying to Jonathan off air, like there's an element of like. Leinster also got a bit of luck as well, that I felt like in some of those narrow defeats they didn't get those small little moments, like the ball hitting the post and landing in Van der Vlier's hands rather than bouncing and going to a La Rochelle player, or Hastoy deciding not to take a few more steps back. I feel like
I thought they got away with I thought the ref as well a little bit. There was a few ones where I was kind of going, I think they're really in yellow card territory here, and they might have given it one more away, and I was thinking, a few of those made me feel uncomfortable. Whereas I think in the big games, that's gone the other way, where I kind of was saying La Rochelle, I was like, how is Dante, or how is Bottia still in the pitch, or how is Skelton? You know what I mean? Yeah. And I felt like there was more of those ones with Leinster. What did you think, Jonathan?
I just find it interesting, because I think part of this is a sort of wider debate of reframing how we view Leinster performances. And like, having watched Leinster in nearly all of the games, and 3 or 4 times in person, I think we're coming away from Leinster performances almost with a completely different impression from what we would have done recently or in recent years, to the point where it's almost difficult to look at this Leinster team and say, oh yeah, they deserve to win that, because they're doing it in a way that is so different to what we're used to. So I would say, like, if you look back to the Lions example in the ERC, and the Lions were flying whenever they came over to Dublin. Claremont is another example, and even like La Rochelle at the weekend. You could come away from all those games, if you just sat down and watched them in isolation, and think that wasn't the best Leinster performance, but the opposition attack just never really got anything going. But if you look at it over the course of a whole season, the common denominator is what Leinster are doing without the ball. And I think we're now sort of reaching the tipping point in that, where people are very impressed with what they're doing without the ball, and seeing how that relates to whether they deserve to win or not. Yeah. But I think it's a complete reframing from how we would have viewed, how Leinster were.
It's easier when you're pumping a team by 30 points to go, God, yeah. No, that's a great point, actually. I hadn't been thinking about it that way. My thinking, I don't know if you're thinking like this, Will, as well, has kind of been like, Jesus, that was, they beat them by 8 points, or it's by 5 points, but the others should have got something out of it because they had lots of ball. So Yeah, I don't know. Do you feel like that watching the games, Will? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and ultimately that game was like decided as we said, like it was won and lost by both teams like, on a number of occasions in the last 10 minutes alone. Like as in there was the momentum shifts, like Antoine Hastoy hitting the post, then getting a drop goal blocked down, and then neglecting to take on another drop goal. Like we talk about game management from a Leinster perspective. I'm sure there's podcasters
Even the conversion, Will.
yeah, podcasters or pundits in
so close, yeah.
Southwest France are probably raking Hastoy over the coals today for how he played. Generally maybe, but certainly in the end game. Obviously, there was lots of talk about Ross Byrne and not taking a drop goal in 2023. I think Hastoy opting to kind of go wide after the first one was blocked down when Leinster were just eating that defence up. Like again, like La Rochelle started that set with a scrum 10 metres out. And when the forward pass was thrown, I'm not sure, when was it? It was kind of edging out of the 22 towards the halfway, at the 10-metre line, probably by the end of it. So I think he should have slipped back into the pocket. But yeah, lots.
But even so, Jonathan's point is an interesting one, because if you think about South Africa, right, just for a moment, and think about the World Cup win, like, and the last 3 games, they were all tight, like unbelievably tight wins. But you wouldn't have said in any of them that they didn't deserve to win it. So maybe we do have to reframe how we're thinking about them. But look, I suppose the key thing is that you keep doing it. You know what I mean? But if you keep doing it, it's not luck. There's something behind it. Do you know what I mean? So maybe we do have to. I hadn't thought about it that way, Jonathan. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one. And I do think these teams are likely going to play each other again. Will Skelton could be back. Jonathan Donty could be back. Toluladu or maybe even Borger at hooker could be back. Dan Sheehan, James Lowe, Hugo Keenan, a lot of different guys could be back or involved. Albeit Keenan actually was fit, he just wasn't selected at the weekend.
Keenan makes a huge difference to that Leinster attack, guys. Like massive. And even the high balls weren't that solid. He's so solid there. You know what I mean? I know Barrett's outstanding, but I think he's probably a 12, isn't he? On a good day.
Yeah.
And I think Keenan is a game changer for Leinster. Sorry, go on, Will. You were heading on to the next point.
Yeah, very interesting. And Leinster have Bath this weekend. Another team whose attack is pretty slick. Finn Russell will be coming. Well, presuming the Bath go with a strong team, which you hope they would for the game at the Aviva. Ollie Lawrence, Joe Cockanasigg, a lot of good backs on show and a good pack as well. So should be a good one on Saturday afternoon. We'll move on to the Munster game, 17-12, Jonathan, on Saturday evening. Not maybe the same standard as we saw in La Rochelle on Sunday afternoon, but as the game wore on, it became more and more gripping. Around 55 minutes in, 9-3, lots of errors from Munster. It was looking like kind of a microcosm of their season. Then all of a sudden, they get that bit of momentum shift. Gavin Coombs makes a big burst at the ruck. Bleuler goes over for the first try, then the cross kick to set up John Hodnett for the second try, the bench making a huge impact. And we actually got there in the end just about with that great Munster Thomond Park English team slaying again. But God, for the first hour, it looked like anything but.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this game as well. It was a very different game, as you say. It didn't give you the feeling that this is like one notch below Test rugby in the same way that maybe Leinster La Rochelle did, but I still find it fairly gripping, fairly engrossing. Certainly probably did it a disservice at the contest with the handling errors. Lots of handling errors on both sides, with I think it was 22 from Munster, so an awful lot, but still a really good game. I thought still really interesting. The bench impact from Munster was probably the main takeaway for me, because you looked at the team and to my mind, I just wondered if that was the right thing to do, because I thought that you were in danger of maybe not getting blown away. Blown away might be too strong, but I felt like you were in danger of being out of touch by the time you were able to utilize that bench. But the way that the game panned out is obviously exactly as Costello would have hoped, with being just close enough when your bench came on, and then the power that you had on that bench really, really swinging it. I was impressed with the way that Saracens started the game. Really impressed with Mauro Toje, obviously named New England captain today as well. I thought he had a really, really good game, and it looked much more like the Saris of old than we've seen in the Premiership this year, where they've been a much more cut loose an awful lot more, been a lot more attack oriented than they have been previously. But yeah, just the Munster bench impact. Tadhg Byrne coming up with some really, really big plays in the end game.
When does he not do it?
He can't play a match and not be man of the match. And
It's
then,
unbelievable.
yeah, and then like the last thing, it can probably sometimes feel like it's overplayed, but we talked about it last week. That's Thomond Park factor as well. Like people are always very quick to examine the crowds in Limerick, but like 22,000 people is a lot. It doesn't always look as big as it is because of the size of Thomond Park, but 22,000 people for a provincial game is seriously impressive going in my mind, especially the weather that there had been last week. And yes, it can sometimes seem that it's overblown, and not just for Munster, for all teams, whenever they come out and talk about the 16th man, but it really felt like it had an impact, and it really felt like the players were being genuine when they came out afterwards and spoke about the impact of the crowd on the game too.
Yeah, I definitely think that the crowd, as the game wore on, especially after that first try, it really ratcheted up another notch and became quite a cauldron for the last quarter. It's funny, like Ty Brink getting him out of the match, he actually made a very poor start to the game, and I was kind of like, oh, is this form? God, has he been playing too much rugby? And then by the end of it, I was like, no, he completely fine, man of the match as per usual.
He had the drop really early on, and it looked bad,
Yeah, it was a bad job.
And worst handling errors of a big bunch of them,
Yeah, and even in the build up to the first try, I was just watching again the highlights today. Like he fumbles the ball and regathers it just before the Coombs kind of pick and go, which would have been a key moment in the game. The bench is an interesting one, Luke, that Jonathan raised, because I must say again, like I'm a massive John Hodnett fan, and when I see him on the bench as he was against Leinster, I'm just thinking I want more John Hodnett in my life. I don't like this idea of him being kind of kept in reserve. Like even against Cast when they were defeated, he scored 2 tries from kind of powerful close range bursts. Tom Ahern was on the bench as well. Now, to be fair, Saracens' bench, which Munster wouldn't have known when they picked their team, was quite weak, I thought, in comparison to what Munster could spring off the bench. And while Saracens were certainly in the ascendancy for the first hour, there's no doubting that the bench impacts from the two teams probably swayed the game ultimately. Interesting that Munster took that risk, because it's not as if they have huge depth in their team. Like Alex Kendellen, who started, is a good player, but I would definitely have Hodnett as my, kind of starting open side there. But they obviously went that direction, and it worked.
Really did. Fairly prescient in hindsight, wasn't it? And I think Ahern as well. Like I think I think those two guys are really, really good players. I think they've been brilliant in those. Like particularly Hodnett has been like a serious find, because I don't think he really looks it, does he? He doesn't really look like a. When you see Josh van der Flier, looks like a perfect kind of athlete, and he's all prim and proper. He looks tidy or whatever. Like Hodnett looks like a kind of a gnarly, kind of old-fashioned kind of 7, doesn't he? But he's got great skills. I think he punches above his weight.
Very quick.
In terms of physicality. He's quick. He's got nice hands, Will. He's got nice hands. He's a good player. Great on the deck, obviously, as well. So, like, he's a brilliant player for Munster and a big player. I would agree with you on that one. I feel like he's a guy, my views on this, I think we probably share it, is that I'd rather see my first guy on for 60, and if he's going well at 60, I kind of keep him going. I'd rather have the option of that rather than bringing him on, even though I can see why you would want the impact, and the way South Africa use it, that's it's been very, very effective. But I don't know. It worked really well for them this time out. I think Hodnett's a really important player for Munster. And I think whoever they have at 6 and 8, he's like the perfect foil for whoever they have there, because they kind of have big, tall guys generally who are kind of, good line-out exponents, good carriers, big, strong guys, whereas he kind of is that other old-fashioned type 7, that kind of groundhog who's kind of in the play, who's got, getting turnovers, nice passes, nice runs. I really like him. I think he's really been a great find the last couple of years. He's been one of the most important players. The other thing I'd mention probably as well, aside from those guys, not to come away from the bench, I thought Murray was very good for large parts of the game. For a guy his age, I think, to be, I say his age, he's kept himself in great condition, but he's had a few big injuries here and there. And that's going to be really important that he plays well for the rest of the season for Munster, because I think, well, we hope Casey gets back before the end of the season, but I think he's going to be under pressure, isn't he? That's a big injury he's got. So, Murray is a really, really important player for Munster to kind of get this season going and kind of get them into knockouts in league and have a respectable, or maybe even better run in the cup. We don't know. I think it's a stretch when you compare them against Bordeaux, Leinster, La Rochelle and Toulouse, but against the rest of the competition, I think they stack up pretty good. And on a big day, if they were at home, I don't think anyone would like to face them down there, So Yeah, lot of big guys that like kind of played well for them, I think. I thought Ahern was good when he came on too. I really like Ahern. Just love the size back there at 6, and he's got that athleticism. He's comfortable in open spaces. So yeah, loads to be positive about. I think that was a great performance. And as you say, the crowd factor I think is probably important to mention. I always thought that stadium was maybe a little bit too big because you've too many games there. Like the majority of your games are league games there, where it's tough to have that impact. Now, when they were building the stadium, they had that brilliant, like I think when the plans were being drawn up, they had that cohort who were there for kind of 10, 12, 15 years that just were like the community just bought in so big behind them. You were kind of thinking, geez, they'll fill this every week. But I always thought it was a bit ambitious. I think Jonathan's point is right. I still think they get great turnout down there, even if it doesn't look great in Thomond. So 22 is still a big number. There was more there than there was in La Rochelle. And I thought they made themselves kind of heard and had an impact on the game the last couple of minutes. It's a big factor. You think most big teams have a strong home presence, you know, and I think that's important to have.
Yeah,
really
it's
important.
Big ask as well. Like a lot of supporters, obviously, probably being based in Cork. Like it's not an insignificant drive to have to go to Limerick for games, especially for like URC games, which can be like on a Friday or a Saturday night. They're not often scheduled kind of on a Saturday afternoon when it's maybe a more easy time to travel. Yeah, I agree with you on John Hodnett. I'd like to see him get Ireland. Sorry,
sometimes the narrative around Munster becomes how many empty seats there are rather than how many people there are in the seats. Like 22,000 for would be incredible.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It was a good turnout at the weekend. On John Hodnett, I'd like to see him get Ireland recognition maybe in the summer tour where it's, going to Romania and Portugal and Georgia. Like I feel like he's a guy who, he was a key contributor when they won the URC a few years ago, and there was maybe calls then to maybe bring him to New Zealand to play those A games. He didn't get the nod, but I'm a massive fan. John, on Saracens, like it's a funny one. Like they definitely were the better team up until maybe that first Munster try, but I felt like they kind of had the handbrake on a little bit. I don't feel they created a huge amount. Like they did exploit Munster with some of those chip kicks and created a bit of chaos, but only kind of got a couple of 3-pointers to show for it. Like outside of the 2 Munster tries, you could argue that the next best 2 try scoring chances was Jack Crowley's almost try of the season contender when he had those few chips, and the maul that Toje held up on the line just before half time. So Munster had the majority of the good chances. So if I'm a Saracens fan, if I'm Mark McCall, I'd be quite disappointed that a team that, the week before against Bristol had been, pretty incisive in attack, struggled to create many try-scoring chances. John Hodnett actually made a very nice defensive intervention towards the end and forced a knock on near the line, but I don't think they deserved to win. They didn't create enough for me.
Yeah, 100%. Like their challenge definitely faded. The point that Luke makes about the depth, like I think what Saracens have probably lost in this rebuild in the post-salary cap scandal is that depth. So, they don't have the same depth for that sort of final 20-minute push that they used to have, the players that they used to be bringing on the bench. But in terms of the attack, like it was an interesting article in the Sunday Times a couple of weeks ago by David Walsh, relating to how teams in England have basically stopped defending and how this isn't, while it's making for an entertaining match-to-match product in the Premiership, it's not helping the thrust of the article was that it's not going to help international players make the step up to Test rugby, but I wonder if it applies to Champions Cup rugby as well. It's like what we used to say about Super Rugby, if neither team's defending, it might make for an interesting or a high-scoring spectacle, but it doesn't particularly prepare you well for other types of rugby, and I just wonder if there's possibly just a bit more resistance from Munster than what they've been facing in the Premiership when they've been racking up these big scores where defence just seems to, there's some sort of unwritten rule that defence has been abandoned this year.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Like you look at the top 3 in England, Bath, Bristol, Saracens, like Bath against La Rochelle. Now the conditions on opening night were not very good. That is true, but Bath, very much stymied by La Rochelle. Bristol against Leinster, despite Leinster being 2 men in the bin at one stage, they scored 7 points and they got a runaway try at the very end when the game was completely out. Saracens, who obviously played against Munster. So yeah, I think there's something to that. It's like it is a basketball league. Like Northampton and Bath played last weekend, 2 weeks ago. 35-34 was an unbelievable watch on a Sunday afternoon, but I don't think you can replicate that when you're playing the very best club teams. And I definitely agree with the step up again to Test rugby. Luke, Jack Crowley's performance, hit some clutch kicks, had a nice crossfield kick in the build up to John Hodnett's try. and obviously almost scored that world class try in the first half, and then a couple of dodgy moments as well, like missing a bad missed touch from a penalty, a line kick, which that's crept into his last couple of games, a few other errors. How did you rate him overall? And obviously with the Sam Prendergast La Rochelle game as well, we were kind of watching both of them to see who kind of maybe has the edge in the battle at the moment.
Well, I thought Prendergast kicked pretty good for the most part, but off the deck. But I thought he was actually poor enough. Actually, I didn't think that was one of Prendergast's better games. To be honest with you, I thought he got the block downs weren't great. I thought his tackling wasn't great as well. So, but that was a big test for him. So definitely more difficult to play against La Rochelle away than it is, Saracens at home. To go back to Crowley. But just it's important to reference for the comparison because that's who we're all comparing him against. I thought he was solid, Will. I thought he was solid for the most part. Like I like Crowley. I think they're kind of different players. I think, Crowley probably has a better, maybe slightly better running game. I know Prendergast's actually quicker than we all thought, and he's quite good in open spaces. But I think Crowley's probably a little bit more effective with ball in hand. I think the difference between them is probably he doesn't put as many guys into holes as clearly or as incisively, I think, as probably Prendergast does, or he doesn't look like he's going to be doing that. But I think, with what his game is, I think I thought he was good, Will. I really like Crowley. I have to say, I thought he steered them around the pitch well. He's pretty solid bar a few things. Like I think he really needs to sort out the line kicking. Like that's a big differentiator between the two of them. And
Prendergast had one unbelievable one against La Rochelle.
He really got that one where he got every last inch out of it. Yeah. Whereas like Crowley looks like for whatever reason he's playing it safe, but he's playing it way too safe. And then the ones that he's going for, he's getting wrong. So, do you think
the Prendergast line kicking is kind of in his head a little bit, maybe? Like he's trying to is he trying to bite off a lot in some of these ones? Like the one that he missed against Saracens was about 5-10 yards away from hitting the touchline.
Well, I think that was a miscue though, wasn't it? Really, like, yeah. Well, I thought it was a bit anyway. Yeah. Look, the eyes might be bigger than the sun, but I don't know. I just rate him really highly. I don't think he should be making mistakes like that, and he should just know his distance. Like, whatever his distance is, that's his distance. It's like a golfer going, like, Molinari's not going to be trying to outdrive McIlroy. Do you know what I mean? And like, I'm not saying that that's the difference between the two guys, but if you're kicking at 30 and Prendergast's kicking at 40, that's what it is. What it is. But you got to make sure your 30 is happening every single time. That kind of way. So, there could be a bit of that going on, but I think it's more because he's being too conservative with what he actually can achieve. He doesn't need to go for the massive distances, but he just needs to get good ones. The team needs to be moving forward when they get a penalty to the right place, not 10 meters up. It needs to be 20, 30 when you're in the right position. So he should be able to deliver that. I really like him. I don't think that battle is over. In my mind, I might be a little bit more over in the coach's mind. I think it seems like everyone's nearly moved on to the Prendergast thing, but I don't think that that's right. I think Crowley's excellent. I think he's very, very solid, and he has exciting moments in him too. Like I just think I hope he's not written off earlier than maybe what my sense is of the kind of rugby community in Ireland. I think the only place he's not written off is Munster. And I don't think that that's right. I think it's a closer battle than people are making out. And I thought that was evident on the weekend from the Leinster game. I thought Prendergast, I think it was kind of because they got the win. I think some of the other things that happened in the game maybe kind of got brushed over. I don't know if you guys agree with that.
I do think he was better than Ross Byrne, who came on and I didn't think played particularly well, managing the team, managing the game when Prendergast was off. I thought Leinster managed the game better. I don't disagree with some of the points about a few errors, the block downs, but I thought the team got quite ragged in possession when Ross Byrne came on.
Yeah, that's fair. It's at the end of the game as well, though, and a bit of tiredness. It's a trickier position to come on. You'd have to wonder why Frawley didn't, but it come on.
Well, that's it. Sorry, yeah. Like, why is Frawley not being brought on and out half? Like, why do they need to bring the both of them on, like, and take off Jimmy O'Brien? Like, for me, Frawley, like, Ross Byrne missed a sitter that, like, off the tee. That's a killer. And I just thought, I don't think he's having a very good season either. So I just don't really understand. Like, Frawley, does the knockbacks keep on coming for him? Like,
sorry, I'm sympathising with Jack Crowley, but Jesus, like, Frawley is not even in the conversation. Like, literally one bad match and one pretty average one, and that's it. gone, kaput. Like
from Ireland and from Leinster, and now he's like the second. Now he's like the third choice fullback. Like he's gone from like starting for Leinster like like 2 months ago to now being like the third choice fullback. But yeah, I would have liked to have seen Frawley come on at out half rather than Byrne, because I said I don't think Byrne is having a great season. I don't think he had a great time steering the ship on Sunday. Jonathan, give you the last word on Munster then. They played Northampton away on Saturday. It's actually a very good Saturday afternoon. We have Munster, Northampton, followed directly by Leinster Bath. So a nice double header for fans to sit down to. What kind of chance do you give them? Northampton, you touched on it there. The Premiership, what's the form line? They had a heavy defeat in the end. It was about 10 points in the end, I think, by Stade Francais. Now, they didn't have their full team playing. They need a win, and with a bonus point potentially if they want to, kind of get a top 2 slot depending on results elsewhere. So lots to play for. How do you rate Munster's chances?
Yeah, it's a strange season for Northampton because they obviously seem to be on this quite rapid upward trajectory last year, and they're down in 8th, I think, in the Premiership at the minute, and that loss to Stade was quite a shock. I think so. Munster can take heart from all of that. I think they can take heart from the performance on Saturday, the way that they got over the line against an English team that is in better form than Northampton are. But I would probably still give Northampton the edge. I know I predicted Saracens to win last week, and that was a tough prediction, but I would still probably give Northampton the edge in this one, but very, very slightly.
Yeah, so we need to see the team sheet and who Northampton have back. I know Finn Smith missed the game with an illness last week, so they'd be hoping he'd be fit because he's obviously their key man. Just before we finish everything up, I want to touch on Ulster and Connacht as well. Jonathan, Ulster obviously 10-0 ahead against Leicester. It looked like they might get a nice away win, and well for Road. Didn't score again for the rest of the game, and the second half was a complete horror show. 38-10 to Michael Cheika's Leicester in the end. How do you assess what you saw? When I saw the team sheets named, actually, I thought the Ulster team rather, had Henderson back. You had it was a Shuku there. Obviously, the back line is still missing a lot of key guys, and that showed in particular with the injuries they got in the second half. But how do you assess how that game unfolded from the nice start to the kind of pretty poor, ugly second half?
Just too many errors. There's players that I think it's not unfair to say ordinarily wouldn't be playing Champions Cup rugby if not for all the injuries that are there. They haven't really had the opportunity to find their feet at even URC level, to prove themselves at URC level, and they're having to make the step up to Champions Cup rugby. And I think certainly defensively and even in terms of the errors that they're making, I think they're being fairly brutally exposed at what is a step up. The disappointing thing for me from an Ulster perspective from this whole campaign is the lack of ability to maximise your returns. You're 10 points up, but I didn't hear an awful lot of people talk about how massive a losing bonus point would have been. So if you're 10 points up, you're essentially 17 points up because 1 point is going to be massive. So to not be able to get 1 point from that situation, to not be able to get a point against Bordeaux when you scored 3 tries so early, to not be able to get the 4th try against Toulouse when they're so far ahead of you that they've sort of taken the foot off the pedal. If you look at each of those games in isolation, Ulster at various points should have been taking at least a consolation bonus point, whether it be for 4 tries or whether it be a losing bonus point, and they didn't manage to do it once. And if you look at the table, if you're expecting Bordeaux to thump the Sharks, which I think everybody is, then all Ulster would have had to do to get into the knockouts would be to beat Exeter at home, who are 9th in the Premiership and seem to be focused very much on domestic matters rather than the Champions Cup. So as much as everyone was very sympathetic to the draw that Ulster got, they got Toulouse, they got Bordeaux, 2 of the 3 favourites to win the competition. To my mind, they should be in a position this week where they have a real chance of getting through to the knockouts, and it's now very much a long shot because they haven't managed to take 1 point from 3 situations where they really could have done.
That's actually a very good point. In particular, the Toulouse game, I agree with you. They had 3 tries, I think around the hour mark maybe, or maybe around 65 minutes. And as you said, Toulouse had almost put 50 up at that stage. And, realistically, they are not defending for their lives like Leinster and La Rochelle. There is room there. And as you say, 3 tries at the 3-quarter mark against Bordeaux. The Leicester one, I suppose, a little that was a complete write-off in the end. But I agree with you, even one point there, because, the Sharks are likely to send no frontliners up to Bordeaux next weekend. So then we get into perpetual argument Are they better off qualifying in 16th and playing Toulouse or Leinster or Bordeaux, or are they better off getting into the Challenge Cup and potentially having a run there? I don't know if we need to.
You always say potentially having a run, but it doesn't happen. This idea that Ulster are better off in the Champions Cup is always predicated on the fact that they're going to do well in it, and then they don't. They beat a Montpellier side that was wholly disinterested last year, and then got thumped by Clermont away. I don't think Ulster in the position that they're in now have the quality to go and win 4 knockout games away from Ravenhill. I just don't think it's going to happen. So from a prestige point of view, from a good feeling around the group point of view, I think this idea that, maybe there is some merit in it, but for me, I just think that you are best playing at the highest level that you can. And also to just try and show that you belong at this level, because I think it's 2 wins from the last 13 in the Champions Cup now. It's fairly horrendous. And then you end up in this battle for the next half of the season to qualify for it again and then go for it all over again. I think they should be making more of a mark in the Champions Cup, regardless of reduced budgets, regardless of the injuries. I still think it's there for them to make more of an impact than they've made over the last 3 seasons, isn't it?
Yeah, and it seems like, you get in 16th and you're just getting hosed. But if people remember, the year Leinster lost to La Rochelle in the Aviva Stadium, La Rochelle's last 16 game against Gloucester, they needed a 79th minute try at home to beat Gloucester, who I think had qualified in 16th or 15th on that occasion. So you never know. If you get in and have a puncher's chance, as unlikely as it seems, we have recent history that shows that you can make an impact. And maybe Gloucester didn't get the win, but they were bloody close. Luke, anything on Ulster you want to add before we finish on Connacht?
Yeah, look, I think the one thing I'd say about the first portion of the game where they're 10-0 up is that I thought it kind of could have been a little bit misleading. I thought Leicester, that guy Bassett,
had a bit of a horror show.
He ended up with a hat trick, but I was like, I was gonna say something horrible about a guy, but I'm gonna try and dampen it down. He just doesn't look like a very good player. I was like, he looks so.
How was you dampening it down? Okay.
I was going to say, I met a colleague and I was like, I made a comment. He goes, geez, that's one of the most cutting comments I've ever heard about a rugby player who got a hat trick on a weekend. But
not that he got a hat trick and didn't get man of the match, but then was still side during the man of the match interview. It was incredible stuff.
Right. That's happened to me, but over in Northampton, I remember. And who
got man of the match? Was it O'Driscoll for that pass through the legs?
Got it through the legs.
The little Carlos Spencer.
But I should have had 4 tries. I remember Sean Cronin had to be the easiest 2-on-1, and he threw a forward pass. I never forgave him for it. But so that's happened to me. So that's not the criteria, Jonathan.
Well, it was more the fact that he was then stood beside the man of the match during the player of the match interview while it was given to somebody else that I thought was incredible.
The indignity.
Yeah, well, sorry. Look, the one thing I'd say, to go back to be serious for a moment, I like Ulster, they're under pressure at the moment. I think the injury crisis really, really does not help. I think, Jonathan's point, I do think is right. I just don't think you improve. You get better improvements by playing against better players, and I think it shows you the standard. And if you've got young players coming in, as much as it hurts results wise, I think in the medium to long term, these are the ones where you kind of weed out people who don't have the belief to go on and compete at the next level. So you either react from this and get better and improve your game, or you don't have the ability to, or you don't. And there's kind of the avenues you can go from this, in my opinion. And so they find out more about themselves from this. But as you say, it's very disappointing that they didn't get something from it, And I think the collapse was just a little bit concerning. I think a little bit. I would call it a collapse. That's a lot of points to concede from having been in front, and to not have nearly any of the game for the remainder of the game, if you know what I mean. Like, to lose by that much without a score is just, it's a collapse. So it's difficult. Like, it's a very difficult scenario that Richie finds himself in. But my one thing is that I do think there's enough in that pack to get you something. Isn't there? Like, there's enough good players there for you to say, like, Timoney's a lovely player. I think he's a great athlete and all that. I'm a huge Izuchuku fan. Henderson's so experienced. Like, there's enough there in my mind to get you something, and that's the disappointing part for me. So Yeah, they're in a difficult spot, guys. I don't think there's no sugarcoating it at this stage. They need bodies back on deck. Like McCluskey's a massive loss for that back line. He just gives them that little bit of leadership, that physicality. They miss Hume too. I know he's not the player he was when he burst on the scene, but he's still an excellent player. And then the back three just seems to be constantly decimated there. So, Stockdale's a big personality, big player for them. It's just disappointing. I'd love to see Richie get a proper go for like kind of 5 to 10 games in a row with a kind of, one injury rather than 6 or 7, you know what I mean? Of his kind of key guys. He hasn't really got one of those runs yet. And I think he's a good Irish coach that I'd like to see do well. So, I'm a little bit worried about the way they're kind of trending, but maybe they can bounce back next week.
Yeah, they do horrible backline injuries. You said they're missing their starting centres, probably their starting back three as well. So, and as they got more injuries over the weekend, it was getting more and more stretched in that area. We'll finish up just quickly on Connacht, Jonathan, obviously in the Challenge Cup rather than the Champions Cup, but 52-24 winners against Leon puts them top of the pile overall in the seedings. If they can beat Cardiff away this Friday night, they'll finish number 1. That would give them a home run through the knockout stages. Funnily enough, they scored, I think, 9 tries. They missed 7 conversions. Like, that's just like unforgivable. Like, Josh Ioane missed 5 and Cathal Ford missed 2. I'm just not trying to be negative when they score 50 points, but like, you left 14 points out on the board. Like, you'd like to tidy that up, certainly, if you're going to be going on a run in the knockout stages. But I feel strongly that Connacht should take this really seriously on Friday night. Like, I think they should pick their strongest team. Like, to add a feel-good factor back into a season that's kind of flatlining a bit in the league, if you have these home games, there's no guarantee of anything, but there ought not to be any teams really in the Challenge Cup that Connacht in Galway shouldn't be able to, go close to beating. I think it could be a really nice rejuvenating factor for a year that kind of have been going off the rails a little bit. What do you think? Am I kind of over-egging the importance of a Challenge Cup run? I think it would be really good for them.
No, I don't think so. Like, part of the reason why I was so dismissive about the idea of Ulster being it is because they would have to win all these games away, and I don't think they're capable of doing it. But Connacht at home, if they can secure home seeding the whole way through, I don't think they'd be that fearful of anybody. And it can sometimes, I think, get overlooked, the amount of top level quality that Connacht have. Like, how many teams in the Challenge Cup would be going in with 3 Test 23 players from one of the best international sides in the world, which is what Connacht have in Beelum, Aki and Hansen whenever he comes back from his suspension. There's not a lot. Like, again, to compare it to Ulster don't have that. There's not a lot of teams in the Challenge Cup that would be able to boast that level of top-end quality that really, really makes a difference in European rugby. You can question the depth, but when it comes to genuine, for want of a better word, star power, like, Connacht have that. They ally that to home advantage through the competition. And I think it could be huge because, you mentioned the league. That festive period, as we talked about last week, was so damaging to their league position and their hopes of, making a charge into the top 8 and better than that, So I think it could really spark a bit of interest if they can go on a run on this competition. And interest it is clearly there. We saw the news the other day, I think it was yesterday, with the sellout against Munster, so there's an amount of good feeling, I think, to tap into around Connacht that a knockout cup run would really, really enhance as well.
Yeah, if they could keep the missed conversions to 3 or 4 rather than 7 as well, that could maybe go a long way to securing that top seeding. Be very interested to see what team they pick for that game in Cardiff on Friday night. We have Ulster Exeter on Friday night, and then that Munster Northampton Leinster Bath double header to look forward to on Saturday afternoon. For now, I'd like to thank Luke and Jonathan for joining me on this week's episode of the Left Wing Podcast. We will be back next week with another show to digest all the European action. So until then, thanks for listening and goodbye.